I want to welcome you to this session called Understanding Disruption, and it's an empathy tool that was developed by my brilliant colleague and I, Jeff Warshaw, who's also on the call and who I hope also contributes. Thank you very much. We came together to talk about how might we understand the families that we serve and how might we understand the different ways that people's lives are being disrupted. Jeff, I know I shared your story earlier, but do you want to talk about like the impetus for this at the grocery store?
Yeah, so a couple months back, as all of the different kind of hurdles we were all learning to navigate with the quarantine were coming into place, I was in a grocery store and I witnessed a little bit of a meltdown by a customer who was very upset that the usual brand of chicken that this person preferred to buy was no longer available, and there was a need to adjust to a different brand of chicken. And I started to wonder about the different kinds of disruption that we and our families and students are experiencing during this stay-at-home time, and which ones generate different kinds of challenges and responses and trauma in the lives and the experiences of our communities. And so that was the sort of the jumping off point for what's become kind of a fun project to explore and develop with FOPI.
And then at the same time, as Jeff has had this experience, I've been keeping track of San Diego COVID cases by zip code. I try to go in and look periodically just where are the pockets that are being hit the most, not just getting sick, but also economically. I know we heard in the Latinx panel that northern cities like Vista and San Marcos, there's a large unemployment rate. So that is going to have a different impact on the community that we're serving. In any case, I was looking at the zip codes and looking at where I live, there's very few cases. Where I grew up, it's triple the amount in San Diego County. And so I just kept thinking, if I was still a principal, I would really want to pay attention to the zip codes, just how hard it's being hit, both economically and physically and mentally, because the way that I'm going to be proactive and intentionally prepare for supports is going to be slightly different. So that was the thinking behind this tool. And so how might we, that was the question we kept asking, how might we understand the disruption that our families have experienced because of COVID? So we did also bring into the deck this piece around trauma. So trauma works very, very differently. There's 4 actually different layers to trauma. If you've heard me speak before, I do tend to say this, but I'm going to say it again until I think it finally sinks in, that there's personal trauma. There's like myself getting sick, myself losing my job. There's also vicarious trauma. I have 2 friends that were currently in the ICU actually as of last week. They were finally released. They're getting better. But it was actually touch and go for a while because one of them is actually 80 years old. So that was vicarious trauma as far as, because it's very close to home. There's collective trauma because as a community, we're experiencing this. As a community, we're social distancing, self-quarantining, and we're experiencing different things because of it. And then of course, historical. Now that's just talking about COVID. We can layer on top everything that's happening with our current civil rights movement. I live in La Mesa, so my son and I fell asleep 2 weekends ago to the sound of helicopters and sirens all night. That adds a layer of a different kind of collective and historical trauma as well. So I know right now we're only talking about COVID, but I also think it's applicable to our civil rights movement and what's happening. So what we developed was this continuum of disruption, thinking about 4 different categories that we live in. There's our physical health, our mental emotional health, the quality of our life, and the routines of convenience. And please know that there was a lot of discussion of which category expresses what and what is the definition of each. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into each one of them. So because we keep calling this an empathy interview, I want to make sure that we set those parameters. There's an assumption by us as authors that you have some knowledge of an empathy interview. If you don't, this is a very quick cheat sheet. There's a lot more information, but really an empathy interview is for you to be empathetic towards the user. The user is the families and the students that we serve. So an empathy interview would be open-ended questions, built-in curiosity, really like foundation of relationships, their sensitivity, especially with certain communities. And I want to say this specifically about cross-race dialogue. I am a Latina and I was raised to learn that questions were rude. And so I've been in situations where my mom is being questioned, just normal questions. And I've had to tell her, they're not being rude, you have to answer these questions. So there's a lot of considerations for the cross-race dialogue that you're going to be engaging in, but also empathy interviews are to show that you care and you want to understand, and they're very open-ended, so it's not really prying. We also recommend that it should be someone that has a relationship with the family, so a current teacher would be best. And then of course the art of the empathy interview is how you craft these questions to get the information to understand without being too pointed. Did I miss anything, Jeff? Okay.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, so here's the physical health, and the way that we did each category is like, this is what we mean by physical health. Here's some potential empathy interview questions, and then here's some practical supports. Now, again, if I were in the audience right now, my practical supports would be different just based on the region or the school or the level of educational system that you're in, but we do want to get into the nitty-gritty of these. So physical health, we mean actual coronavirus diagnosis, like was there a family or a friend or yourself sick? Did you recover? I hate saying this, but did you die, right? Like was there a death in the family? That's going to impact. There's also this piece around postponement of health issues. I have several people that I know have put aside some treatments that they need to go and get because they can't expose themselves. And then also hospitals are overloaded with the tasks that they have to do. So they've also been kind of postponing surgeries and things like that. So an empathy interview question, which would be very open-ended, it would be, how is your health? How is the health of your household? Were there any health concerns that were postponed or ignored because of COVID-19? So just very general sort of question. You go with what they tell you. And if you see that there's an entry point to ask more, I would just say, tell me more about that. So still leaving it open-ended, still leaving it up to them to see what they want to disclose. Now, this one particularly is hitting me pretty close to home because I have a niece who's got teeth issues and the dentist office isn't open yet. And so her dentist office isn't open yet. So I just kept thinking, if I was her teacher, I would want to know this in order to get the supports necessary for her when she returns to school, because this is a postponement of physical health. So there's going to be little things like that that we want to make sure we know just what our children are going to need when they return. For the mental and emotional health one, we thought that first we needed to really talk about how that shows up for children. Asking a child just how are you doing or how are you feeling sometimes doesn't get us the data that we need because children's anxiety shows up differently. My son is having very different sleeping patterns, and so I know that that's some of the anxiety, that's how it's showing up. And I notice it in his eyes when he wakes up in the morning. So some of the things that we want to make sure is that when we ask about these questions, we have to be thoughtful. We want to be authentic, but we also want to just kind of get in, have you noticed any changes in the child's behavior? Are their sleeping patterns different? Are they getting along with their siblings? Little things like that that we know are how a child's anxiety shows up. So again, what do we mean by mental emotional health? We're talking about the impact of self-isolation, of social distancing, of fear and anxiety. We're very concerned of children whose parents were essential workers who could potentially be home alone while their parents go off to work. Were children providing home care? How many people were quarantining together? What's the quality of those relationships? And then of course, some of the open-ended empathy interview questions are things like, how are you feeling? How's your child? How did you feel during quarantine? Did your child act any differently? Did your child have different responsibilities while at home? And then of course, what are some of the supports that we have? Now I know one of my hard lines when I was a principal was, we need a full-time counselor. And so I know I would always go in and lean with her, but even we had a special clinic where we referred children for therapy as well. So that's what I'm thinking about. Like if you get some information here that you know you have further needs, then what are the supports that exist at your school site? For quality of life, and this one I will say that quality of life and routines of convenience tend to bleed with each other, but I have the ability to work from home. I am an essential worker, but I can work from home. I'm very comfortable here. So were parents essential workers? Were they working from home, or were they out exposing themselves? Were the children providing home care? The space, like how much outdoor space did they have? Can children still play outside? Was there inside space for learning? Was there virtual connectivity? Like, were they playing Minecraft together, and can the person still socialize? So some of the questions are, did you have everything that you needed? And what could the school do that supported you? What responsibilities did children have at home during this quarantine? And then of course, an open-ended question could lead you to get deeper into things like food security, employment, space, and something that could also kind of pivot into a proactive way could be, what other needs do you have that we could help facilitate? Now, again, some of the practical supports that we were thinking about is, what are the community partners? But I'm really thinking about this one because I had close to 800 students, and most of them lived in apartments. And I know that green space, outdoor play is necessary, not just for your mental health, but it's also quality of life. So I would be trying to figure out, when they return, how might I get them outside regularly? Like more than usual, more than the weekly PE, but even starting the day, something like that. So just to improve their quality of life and their mental health state when they come back to campus. Lastly, we have this notion of routines of convenience. Again, part of my privilege of self-quarantining is I can have my groceries delivered. I have all of the entertainment. I have books, I have Netflix and Hulu, and you name it. I can do my laundry at home. I don't have to go to the laundromat and expose myself, or I don't have to have dirty clothes on. I have recreation that I can do. And then there's errands, paying bills online versus going and getting a cash and a money order. And this one's really important to me because I grew up going to the liquor store to buy a money order to pay my bills. And my mom still does that, much to my chagrin. And so she's still going off and doing that. It's very much a habit. And so there's a lot of our families that are doing that. So some of the empathy interview questions that we came up with were, what are some things that got a little harder to do? Were there any new habits that were developed? And then again, I'm gonna really lean on to this community partners that you would need to activate, or even how might you help coordinate some sort of book entertainment exchange with the community. I saw a really beautiful post from New York where this woman actually outside of her building wrote, I've read all the books in my household and I'm really bored. Like, do you have any books? And her neighbors just started leaving her books. So little things like that that we can do just to show care, to show that we're supportive of this would be really beautiful to have. And then, so then there's the now what, right? So if we are encouraging you to get to know just how disrupted the community that you serve was, and really thinking about how might I start to prepare to be proactive to really integrate and re-engage with the children, what are some of the trends and patterns that you notice? Because you're gonna be noticing some of the way the whole community experienced COVID. And so what would that mean for your whole organization? How might you be proactive instead of reactive once the kids come back? And then I will say, how do you communicate those trends and patterns across the school site so that we're all empathically aware? And I think that that's a big one, because sometimes we conduct these empathy interviews, but we keep it with whoever's doing the empathy interviews if they've been delegated, and we don't sit down as a staff to say, these were the patterns and trends that we noticed of how the community that we drive to serve every day experienced COVID. And then of course, there's the edges. There's families who are going to be in crisis that we're going to need to support. There's leverages across our, we can leverage resources across our school, across our district and the county to help them. We have a very long list from the DA actually, specifically for all of this help. And then lastly, how and with whom do we need to communicate across the whole school site so that we're all empathically aware? So again, those are the two things that we recommend once you have all of the data that you've collected. Jeff, did I miss anything?
I don't think you missed anything. I would just add two quick comments. One is the potential for this also to inform you about the experiences of your staff members. While we built it more with students and families in mind, it certainly would be relevant to staff members as well. And the other is just the encouragement that the conversation across these categories and questions really should be just that. It's a conversation and not an interrogation. And so that point that Fabi made at the beginning about the value of someone with a relationship with a family being probably the best positioned to engage in the empathy interview, is really important, because at its core, this is about a relationship and cultivating and nurturing and really honoring a relationship that we have with our families and communities.
And I appreciate that reminder, because I know the principals I'm still coaching, I actually have asked them to do one-on-ones with their staff. I know I would want to know where my whole staff was. I jokingly say I would have the nervous, very nervous, anxious teacher all the way to the one that's, you know, out there fighting for her right to get COVID. I would have everybody on my staff. So I would want to know just what culture do I have on my hands right now that we're experiencing this pandemic and that we're experiencing Black Lives Matter movement. So I'd really want to kind of gauge who it was that I can lean on when we come back. So thank you for that reminder, Jeff. I see a question about when do you recommend doing these interviews? And I know, and I'm a year-rounder parent, so I understand that. I would actually, the way, if I were to lead this, I would want my teachers to reach out to the families and sit down as a family to do that Zoom call and collect that data, just because the relationship is there and it's really important for the relationship to be there. And I would I would actually start doing it now just for next year, especially because you're going to have about a month and a half to design whatever fall looks like. And I would rather have that data now so I can start thinking about what are the supports that the kids are going to need right when we come back, and how might we, so maybe there's something that I haven't even thought of that we can actually implement in the summertime, and I can lean on the district to help me put in place.
And then I would also add, and there's a follow-up question about parents and students. The age of the student is an important consideration, and exactly who you're speaking with as well. For younger kids, their parents are going to be have important perspective to be able to share. Not that we shouldn't also speak to the kids, but including the parents. For older kids, I think the opportunity for them to be able to have their own voice and speak for themselves and have that honored is super valuable as well.
Mm-hmm. So that wraps up our quick 15-minute sessions. They go really fast. Actually, I appreciate them because that's about my attention span, I think. But I hope that you enjoyed it too. All of this will be available to you. We're recording this session, so the session will be available to you. The slides will be available to you. And I know Jeff's and my information is also on the slide deck. So if you want to follow up with a question, we're definitely here to support you. I know we have a quick poll, so if you can take that poll before you go, and if you want to stay behind and just for further dialogue, we're going to be here for a few more minutes to do that.